Can everybody hear me? Ah, yes, that's better. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Pinot Noir tasting this afternoon at the Co-Vintners inaugural trade day. It's very exciting to be here. As you can hear, I have come across the ocean to be involved here. My name's Kate McIntyre. I'm a Master of Wine, and I'll be leading this tasting and hopefully keeping this lot under control as well. We've got an hour, which sounds like a long time, but I'd like us to have as much time as we can with the wines. So I'm going to speak very briefly about Pinot Noir in general, and then I'm going to throw to the winemakers to talk about their wines. Please feel free to start smelling and tasting your wines as we go along. Don't wait for me to say now we'll take some time to taste the wine, because we're not going to do that. We're going to be talking and thinking about the wines as we go along. And the other thing that I think is really important to remember is that these wines will change in the glass. So if you start having a look at them straight away, have a smell through, have a little taste through, and think about them while we're talking, they will change a lot in the glass, and you'll get a lot more out of them if you engage with them from early on in the tasting all the way through. So also, don't swill them down quickly. Have a little sip, have a little taste, and let them evolve in the glass for you. Pinot Noir as a variety is a really exciting, it's a really exciting and frustrating variety to deal with, whether you're a grape grower, a winemaker, or a wine merchant trying to find the perfect Pinot Noir to put on your wine list or into your shop. As a consumer as well, Pinot Noir can be incredibly frustrating because it changes so much depending on where it's grown and how it's treated. It's very sensitive to all of the things that all wine is sensitive to, but Pinot Noir is especially so. It's very easy to get things wrong with Pinot Noir, and it's very difficult and frustrating to get things right often. In the vineyard, it's very susceptible to not enjoying where it's planted. It needs to have exactly the right conditions to grow well. It needs to be planted in the right aspect with the right climate. It needs to be treated in the right way as far as pruning, as far as managing the vines in the vineyard. It's not as forgiving as any of the other grape varieties out there. In the winery as well, it can be very frustrating. It's very easy to get the picking date wrong. You know, you think you're waiting for it to get ripe, and then all of a sudden it's gone too far, and you've lost that elegance, and you've lost that silkiness. In the winery, it needs to be treated with kid gloves as well. It's very easy to lose some of the perfume if you're not careful. That said, it's not a variety that you need to mollycoddle too much in the winery, but you do need to know what you're doing. And I think as winemakers, we learn more and more about our vineyard site, and our particular Pinot Noir vines that we have planted every year that we turn them into wine. And every year I think there's the frustration of something not being quite what we want it to be, not being quite as perfect as we aspire, because Pinot Noir producers are perfectionists. They really are, and they've drunk great Pinot Noir, often from Burgundy, that has inspired them. I certainly try to inspire myself often with great Pinot Noir from Burgundy, but not all of us have the birthright and the privilege of being born in France of a Burgundy producing family, and it hasn't stopped us from wanting to create great Pinot from other parts of the world, and that's what this tasting is all about. It's about going beyond Burgundy. It's about tasting Pinot Noir from, okay, where are we tasting Pinot Noir from? We're going to Croatia, we're going to Chile, we're going to the Mornington Peninsula in Australia, we're going to Central Otago in New Zealand, and we're going to Austria. All of these wines represented today has a person here to talk to you about the wines, and we'll move on to that in just a moment. I think probably you guys are very familiar with Pinot Noir as a grape, because it's become a very popular style of wine in this day and age. It's a variety that is a little bit fickle, but it's also one of the most ancient grape varieties that we know of. There are records going back to the 4th century in Burgundy of Pinot Noir, and they think that's probably where Pinot Noir started out. But it has the thing that really engages Pinot Noir lovers and producers is the fact that it mutates so easily. And not only has it mutated to create Pinot Blanc and Pinot Gris and all the other the Pinot variations, but we have a huge number of different clones of Pinot Noir that have developed over the time. That is something that particularly those of us who haven't had Pinot Noir in our part of the world for a long time are very, very interested on working out which clones work better or worse in which parts of the world. And it's certainly something that Pinot Noir producers talk about a lot. It's not particularly interesting, but I think suffice to say that most of us believe, and possibly some of these gentlemen sitting next to me will disagree with me later on, but most of us agree that the more clones that you can get doing well in your vineyard, the more complex and the more layered and the more interesting your Pinot Noir will be. That said, a clone that does well in my vineyard is not necessarily going to do well in any of these vineyards. It's very much a site-specific thing, and it's very much trial and error. So that's another frustrating thing, because when you're talking about trial and error in planting a vineyard and making wine, you're talking about a 20 to 30 year wait time to find out whether that trial has worked or not, because that's when the vines will be mature and will be producing their best fruit. So, Pinot Noir, what do we look for in a Pinot Noir, regardless of where it comes from? Well, it's a thin-skinned variety, so it tends to be relatively pale in colour compared to things like Cabernet and Shiraz and Malbec. And we can see this on the table today. Not only is it pale in colour, but it's quite jewel-like. It has a ruby to garnet kind of a look to it. It will often have a little bit of brick to it, and that's not a problem at all. One thing that I would say about colour in Pinot Noir is that it's unimportant. Don't ever judge a Pinot Noir by the colour that it presents in the glass. As long as it's relatively clear and bright and it has an attractive hue to it, the depth of colour is not important, and it doesn't really tell you very much about what the wine is going to smell or taste like either. Pinot Noir aromatically should have aromas of fruit, whether it be raspberry, strawberry, berry fruit, through to cherry fruit, which can range from red cherries all the way through to dark liqueur cherries in some aspects. You should also get some perfume, and Pinot Noir is notorious and famous for its perfume, and the perfume will range from floral notes, from roses and violets, through to spices and herbs and everything in between. So it should have a very beguiling nose. It should be perfumed. It should be drawing you in. People talk about Cabernet being an intellectual wine and Pinot Noir being a wine that you react to emotionally, and I think that it's easy to fall in love with great Pinot, and it's easy to be disappointed by Pinot that hasn't made you fall in love with it. On the palate, Pinot Noir should have a lightness and should have a suppleness, but it should also have good structure. It should have some tannin structure, and it should have acid, and it should be in balance with the fruit. So you should have, will range from having quite savoury, quite firmly structured Pinot Noirs all the way through to very floral, very fruity and supple Pinot Noirs, but they need to have that bit of tannin to clean up the fruit and to make the wines mouth-wateringly delicious and make you want to have another sip. Pinot Noir should inspire you to drink a bit more Pinot Noir if it's good. It's very food friendly. It works very well with a lot of different foods, and it's one of the reasons that Pinot Noir is so popular today is that it goes really well. It goes fantastically with, obviously with duck. Duck is your classic match to Pinot Noir, but it goes very, very well with pretty much any other type of poultry. It works well with lighter meats as well, and some of the richer Pinot Noirs can go very well with a steak. So it also works well with vegetarian food, so if you're not a meat eater, it's all right. I think that experimenting with food and wine matches is particularly fun with Pinot Noir because it is such a versatile variety, and it's quite nice to drink just on its own as well. I think that's probably enough in general about Pinot Noir. I'm going to come back and talk to you about the Mornington Peninsula and about my wine in a little while, but I'd like to introduce the first of our producers today. Vlado is from Krauthaker Winery in Croatia, and Dennis is going to translate for him. So, Vlado, would you like to tell us about your Pinot Noir, what inspired you to grow and produce Pinot Noir, and how it works for you?
I'm going to have to translate, so just bear me 1 second.
Mislim da je Pinot crni koji za nas najbolje klimata,
Well, traditionally, where Vlado comes from, this is a continental part of Croatia, and traditionally it was all about a Vina, which is a white variety, or also known as a Welsh Riesling. But Vlado, through the years of, with all his experience, truly believed that it's a perfect country, perfect part of the country for a Pinot Noir. With the lovely long, warm autumns as well, which is perfectly suitable for Pinot growing.
How long have you been producing Pinot Noir on this site, Vlado?
Well, Vlado started his own winery back in 1991, and as I said, it was then part of Yugoslavia. Croatia was part of Yugoslavia, so mainly was about a Vina, which was a very high-yielding variety, and the idea was to let's produce as much as possible rather than the quality, and that started changing in 1991, 1992, when he planted first vineyard of a Pinot.
I think have you all tasted this wine, the first wine number one? It's got a lovely colour. It's not deep in colour, but it has a lovely garnet brightness to it. And on the nose, I get really lovely berry fruit and a little bit of cherry there. There's some spice too, but it's got a really bright fruit character, which I think is really gorgeous, very refreshing. On the palate, you get that crunchy fruit, you get lovely acid, a little bit of can you see how that tannin just sort of cleans everything up, and it just makes your mouth feel cool and fresh. Does anyone have any questions about this wine for Vlado, or any comments?
I have one question.
Yep.
How was the vintage 11 for Croatia?
Kod nas je bitno da Pinot crni ima 145 do 155 dana vegetacije od vrijeme.
It wasn't a too hot vintage actually. It was quite nice and warm throughout the year, and actually there wasn't any rain actually during autumn time, so they had almost a perfect vintage.
Okay. Could I ask how is the wine made?
So the wine this comes from the two separate vineyards. Where Vlado comes from, the beautiful rolling hills, about 250 to 350 meters above sea level. It's a combination of sandy rock and the sandy clay, two different vineyards. This is a combination of the two vineyards, obviously. Cold macerated for 4 days and 10 degrees, and then obviously barrel fermented and older oak between 500 to 2,000 liters. 25% of that is and then aged in oak for 1 year. 25% of that is new oak. Wine is not filtered and not fined either.
You can see that in the wine if you have a look. There's a little bit of cloudiness to it, which is another thing that you, as Pinot Noir lovers, you shouldn't be afraid of a little bit of cloudiness in the wine, because it does tell you that it hasn't been filtered or fined. A lot of people will say that filtration and fining of Pinot Noir will knock it around a lot more than pretty much any other grape variety, and that you will lose some of the perfume that we love in Pinot Noir by fining and filtering the wine. It's lovely for it to fall bright, and this is pretty bright. I don't have a problem with that level of cloudiness. I think it just tells you that it's been gently treated, and the texture of the wine is lovely as well. So it sounds, we talk about New World Pinot, and I guess your part of the world is pretty special because it's old world, but it's one of the newest Pinot regions in the world.
Well, it certainly is. I mean, we like to say it's a kind of combination of new world and old world. I mean, It's still, don't forget, it's still, when I said it's continental part of Croatia, it's still quite warm. So I think it is a lovely, that bright fruit there as well. You said there's a lovely the freshness to it as well, but but also there's that rustic side to it. I think that earthiness, which kind of is more closer to the old world, I think, as well. So I mean, we say it's a combination of the new and old in a way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fabulous. So Pinot Noir, everyone talks about Burgundy when they talk about Pinot Noir. It's a traditional home, but in Europe it has traditionally also been planted in lots of other places. It's been planted in Alsace. It's been planted in the Loire Valley. It's obviously been planted in Champagne, mostly to make into sparkling wine. But I think that for those of us in the New World, seeing how Pinot Noir is working in our new regions is really very exciting. And I think the next wine that we're going to move on to is the Pinot Noir Gran Reserva from 2012 from Vina Morande in Chile. 2010, I'm sorry, there's a typo on the sheet, so it's a 2010 with the Vina Morande. Carlos, would you like to tell us about this one?
All right, well, hello. Well, first of all, I want to thank for arranging this. It's really nice to have a chance to explain New World Pinots and have a chance to share our thoughts and our winemaking techniques with you. I can't help to talk about Pinot Noir in Chile and not talk about Casablanca. Pinot Noir, as a grape varietal, has been in Chile for a while, but it was growing in very warm regions, so we were not actually achieving proper Pinot Noir. It was only in the middle of the 80s that actually our winemaker, Mr. Morande, started to plant vines in Casablanca, the first cool climate valley in Chile. He first started with whites, Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay, and then in the early 90s, we started to plant Pinot Noir. So what I must say about Chile Pinot Noir is still quite young. We only start doing like proper Pinot Noir, cool climate regions, not even 20 years ago. So you're seeing it's been a learning process, a very tough learning process, because as you were saying, Pinot Noir is a tough cookie. It's not easy to make good Pinot Noir. But the results are coming year after year. They're really improving. And well, you can see that in the one we're trying today. This comes from our El Ensueño vineyards. They are located in Casablanca in a sub-valley called Lovalle, which is closer to the Pacific Ocean. It's one of the oldest Pinot Noir vines in Casablanca. It's almost 20 years old now. So it's really starting to give like smaller clusters, really small berries, more thicker skin, which allow us to have more concentration of flavors and aromas. And well, the cool climate of Casablanca really, really helps the evolution of the Pinot Noir, of the grapes. If you see, it's a very clear color, deep ruby. And in the nose, it's a very, I don't know, I would like to say it's a very floral wine. A lot of rosebuds. When it comes to fruits, I can now stand strawberries, black cherries. Once on the palate, again, you will see all the floral side of this Pinot, the same fruits, but also there's this spice notes that comes from the oak aging that we use in this wine. 100% of the wine goes through oak barrels, 33% new barrels, but the main difference between us and other wineries in Chile, we use big casks, 600 liters, 2,000 liter barrels, because in our philosophy we put so much effort in growing like really high quality grapes that we want to have a really agey, gentle and elegant wine oak aging, and that's why we're using these big barrels. The wine is in the barrels for almost a year, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the vintage.
I think this is a fabulous example for me of a style of Pinot Noir that has developed to really represent the country that it comes from and the region that it comes from. I think that these Pinot Noirs from Casablanca have this incredible brightness of fruit and this incredible, as you say, floral lift to them, and a almost a grapefruit type of acidity. It's really very, very, for me, classic Casablanca Chile style Pinot Noir, and seeing more and more complexity and weight coming into the wines now. And this wine, compared to your Croatian wine that, as Dennis said, has this lovely sort of combination of old world and new world characteristics, the earthiness but then the bright fruit. This is such a different shaped wine and such a different style of Pinot Noir, and very, for me, very Chilean. It's got that high altitude kind of freshness to it. It's got this incredible perfume and concentration of bright fruit. It's you stick your nose in it and you just go, oh, that takes me straight to Chile. And I think that's really exciting, because the other thing that is wonderful about Pinot Noir is that it does speak very strongly of where it comes from, and that's something I believe. I'd be interested in people's reaction to that, but I think that already, just having tasted the first two wines, there's such a difference between the styles of the wines, and they speak very much of where they come from. Obviously, winemaking decisions and decisions in the vineyard will have an effect on that. Another thing that is deeply contested and often discussed in Pinot Noir is the limestone factor. There's a lot of limestone in Burgundy, and the Burgundians say that the best sites for Pinot Noir are on the limestone. There are people who have gone to find the best limestone sites outside of Burgundy as well to plant Pinot Noir, and I can cite Josh Jensen of Calera Vineyards in California. There's some producers in New Zealand who have gone looking for limestone and found some limestone pits and planted their vineyard there. And I think that people who have got limestone love to tell us about how Pinot Noir works best on limestone. I'm not sure how many people up here have got limestone. We certainly don't at Moorooduc, and I think that limestone is one of the soils that Pinot Noir does very well on. Pinot Noir needs to have fairly poor soil. It tends to get over vigorous in soil that is too fertile. So we have very sandy soil on sandy loam, sandy loam on sandy clay, and that works well for Pinot Noir. I think that a lot of clay will work well for Pinot Noir, sandy soil, limestone, gravel even. So the winemakers who are here, I'd be interested to hear their opinions about the importance of soil, and is limestone essential for making great Pinot Noir?
Our Pinot Noir does come from granitic soils.
Okay.
It's 100% granitic and clay. Very poor soils, and so far it's working because it's not only the soil in Casablanca, it's the weather. It's really a key factor that helps. Now in Chile, there are some new areas that actually we have limestone.
Yes.
It's in the coastal area south of Chile, but the weather is quite unstable, and only a few very small producers are daring to plant Pinot, and we're all expecting to see what comes out from there. And also, you have seen in the north of Chile, pretty much in the very border where the desert starts, we also have some calcareous soil. And that also showing like a totally different style of Pinot Noir compared to the ones that we produce, but also true to the varietal. So, I mean, as you were saying, the soil definitely has a say here, very important. But, I mean, when you have the terroir that implies everything, soil and weather, it's not all about limestone. You can also do great Pinots.
Absolutely, I agree. You need a cool climate. Whether your cool climate comes from elevation or being in the southern hemisphere further south, or in the northern hemisphere further north, but you need to have a cool climate. You need to have poor soil, but limestone, I'm not so sure if limestone is on its own the key to great Pinot Noir. Gunther, I think your wine's next, isn't it?
Yeah.
We have a Central Otago wine from a very, very New Zealand based German.
Yeah, first of all, I have to apologize for my Kiwi accent. Hope you can understand me while sitting here and trying to explain what we are doing at Elephant Hill. Elephant Hill is based in Hawke's Bay, North Island of New Zealand. And when I came over there 7 years ago, we decided with the winemakers, where do we want to have a Pinot if we are going for a Pinot Noir? And there was, we made up our minds what kind of wine we want to produce. And for me, a Pinot should be delicate. It should be elegant. It should have the hints of red berries, like Kate said before. I need this floral aspect. And after finding what kind of style we want to create, there was only two options for us to go. One was Martinborough on the North Island, which is probably not giving you exactly this style, and the other one was Central Otago. So we decided to get into Central Otago. There are two vineyards, one is in Terrace, one in Alexandra, and this is the only continental climate in New Zealand. So the altitude is between 250 and 300 meters. We got this nice exchange between warmer temperature during the day and cooler nights. So these vineyards, two vineyards, have two different soil structures. Maury Point in Terrace has a wind-blown loess, and Alexandra is schist-based with a nice gravel part of it as well. And these two combining is actually giving us these aromatics and this taste we are looking for. So both vineyards now are organic produced. Hand harvest, we talked about different clones. We're using 3 different clones. It's the 115, 667, and 777. It's probably too much into details, and I don't want to go any further on that. More important for me is the yield. We are aiming for not more than 1.5, 2 kgs per wine. The density is 2,500, 25 on a hectare, so it's typical New World plantings. We're transporting these berries on 20 kg crates in a cooling truck from Central Otago up to Hawke's Bay. This is a starting point of getting a kind of maturation. So we have a cool soak for 12 days. We have wild ferments, open top fermenters, and after pressing later on, it's matured in oak, Burgundian oak, 35% roughly new oak. And as I mentioned before, and then 11 months before bottling. So again, where I started from, we're trying to achieve this, I would say, not this too masculine, this more delicate, feminine is probably the wrong word, but more these hints of strawberry, red cherries, and especially the floral at the end. And I hope this is an example for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dieter. I think we have another very distinctive Pinot Noir that speaks of where it comes from. I think Central Otago, it always astonishes me when you look at New Zealand on a map and it's really out in the ocean, in the middle of nowhere, and all of that ocean around it, and then that huge mountain range that is Central Otago that gives you guys that incredible rain shadow, means that you have this wonderful long hang time that you can leave the grapes out and get lovely ripeness. You get that dark fruit character without losing your acidity. So a very distinctive style of wine. The geography looks a bit like Alsace, but I think that the wines from Central Otago couldn't be more different than the Pinot Noirs from Alsace. So really fabulous, and it's quite an elegant and savoury style of wine. From Central Otago. It's my turn to talk about my wine now. Moorooduc Estate, a small family business on the Mornington Peninsula, which is an hour's drive south of Melbourne. the Mornington Peninsula is very much affected by the winds that come from the east and the west and the south. We have winds that come from the west, come across from Adelaide, come across the desert, and they hit Geelong when they're as hot and as dry as they possibly can be. And then we have this beautiful bay of water, Port Phillip Bay, where the wind comes across and cools down and becomes moister before it hits the Mornington Peninsula, which means that if you look at a map, you would expect Geelong and the Bellarine Peninsula to have a very similar climate to the Mornington Peninsula, but they're very different. The Mornington Peninsula is considerably cooler and considerably wetter than the Bellarine Peninsula. We also have cooling winds that come from the south, which basically come up from the Antarctic, with just that little island called Tasmania to get in the way of them. So they're very cold winds that come from the south. And also the winds that come from the east come from the great bit of ocean that sits between Australia and New Zealand, and they're pretty cold and pretty brutal as well. We are a narrow piece of land in the middle of water on a great big continent, which makes the Mornington Peninsula unique in Australia. We have a very Mediterranean climate. We don't suffer from the continental issues that most of the rest of Australia suffers from, and we don't have frosts in the growing period. We don't have snow. We don't have the extreme heat that a lot of the rest of the Australia has, and it's a great place to grow Pinot Noir. My family has been growing Pinot Noir here since 1983. And in fact, the wine that we're looking at today is the Robinson Pinot Noir, which is grown by a friend of ours who has a vineyard down the road. He's been growing fruit there for almost as long. And we buy a small parcel of fruit from Hugh Robinson. It's called the Robinson Pinot. We buy a small parcel of Pinot Noir from him every year, and we've been making a single vineyard wine from this parcel of fruit from Hugh since 2008. The 2010, I think, is a fabulous example of a really lovely vintage. 2010 was a great vintage for Pinot Noir on the Mornington Peninsula. Everything went right. Nature was on our side that year, which it isn't always. We also do suffer from vintage variation on the Mornington Peninsula, unlike lots of other parts of Australia. But 2010 was a good one. These vines are fully mature and they're producing beautiful fruit. We were talking about clones before. It's a clonal selection as well. We have some MV6, which is the mother vine 6, which came to Australia in 1838 with the James Busby collection. They've traced it back to Clos Vougeot originally, so quite a good pedigree, but it's been in Australia for a long time. And it actually copes very well with the warmer weather in Australia. It's acclimatised well, like a lot of the people who have been living in Australia for a long time. The other clone that we have here is a newer arrival. It's called 777. It does very well in Burgundy, and it's part of the Dijon selection that has gone out around the world in the last couple of decades. Hugh was one of the first people to plant 777, and so we get to benefit from his mature vines, 777 vines, and that gives this wine the structure and the perfume that we don't get from MV6. So I think, we talk about clones a lot in the New World because we're still trying to work out what works in which sites and what gives us the best complexity in our Pinot Noir. Mornington Peninsula Pinot generally expresses itself in the cherry fruit spectrum, and in our part of the Mornington Peninsula, which is the warmer part, which is closer to sea level, and we're not as affected by the southerly winds as Red Hill, we get dark cherry fruit, and you can see this in this wine. It's the sort of dark cherry fruit, ripe dark cherry fruit, lovely spice as well. The winemaking is very simple. We destem because we get very small berries, so a lot of skin to juice contact. We don't add any yeast. They're wild yeast fermented. We rely on the yeast that is in the vineyard and in the winery to ferment for us, and we don't inoculate with malo. They go through naturally as well. Open vat fermenters, we get a cool soak for about 7 to 10 days prior to fermentation starting. The ferments get up to about 35 degrees, which another thing is nice about Pinot Noir. It does like a hot ferment. 35 degrees is a good temperature for it. and the ferments take sort of about five days or so, and we'll hand plunge on a daily basis to make sure that we're getting as much skin to juice contact as possible. Once the fermentation is finished, a couple of 2 to 3 days after the fermentation is finished, we'll press the wine off the skins and it'll go to barrel. About 25% new French oak, the rest is 2 to 5 year old oak, and it will stay in barrel for about 14 months. The malos tend to go through in spring, so we don't add any sulphur until all the malolactic fermentations have gone through. Once they're finished, we'll sulphur the barrels, we'll then let them sit and we let them clarify naturally. We haven't had to filter or fine our wine for the last 10 years, so we get lovely clarity from giving them that time. And this is the result of that. I think it's a really lovely. I see a lot of, as well as cherry, I see floral characters in this wine. It's violets and roses, but very different floral characters from the Chilean wine that we had as wine number 2. Lovely spice, almost Moroccan spice characters, and on the palate there's a lot of tannin there, but it's very fine, it's very silky. Makes it a great wine to drink with food. That tannin cleans up proteins and fats really nicely, but it's quite nice to just sit and sip and drink on its own. I think Mornington Peninsula, as far as Australia is concerned, Mornington Peninsula is the most exciting place in Australia to be growing and making Pinot Noir. I've tasted Pinot Noir from all around the world. We have a Pinot celebration that we run on the Mornington Peninsula every 2 years, which I chaired last year for the first time, which is very exciting. And I really do believe that we are in the heartland of Pinot Noir country in Australia. The Pinots from Mornington Peninsula are just going from strength to strength, and I'm delighted that my father had the foresight to plant vines in the early 80s so that I can come in and be involved in such a wonderful Pinot producing winery in such a gorgeous part of the world. And I urge you all to come and visit us sometime because it's rather beautiful. We have one more Pinot Noir to talk about, and this is our Austrian Pinot Noir, Dieter.
It is a very short jump from Australia to Austria, just one kangaroo jump. Many times we were asked, Australia and Austria, this here mixed and changed. Austria, it's the music, are the high mountains. And we answer most of the time, not Australia, it is the kangaroos. It is far away. Austria, a small country, and we are on the east side at the border of Hungary, 70 kilometers far away from Vienna. It is just, you can throw the stone over the border to Hungary, and we are principally, Austria is principally a part of the cool climate regions with the high mountains. But Burgenland, in this area where we are influenced by the warm climate from the Pannonian area, from the Hungarian area. We have a very high quotation of sunny days, more than 2,000 hours a year of sun. It's very high volume compared with the south of Austria or with the west of Austria. We are influenced by the warm climate from Pannonia. We are located here in the last point of Austria, and there's one lake, it's called Neusiedlersee. It's a very flat lake, a big one, and this lake influences also the whole region because the warm temperature, it's heating up the whole day. In the night, it is stabilizing the temperature. It's very good and important for us for the vineyard, which is located. One vineyard from us is located at the lake, and in the evening a mild wind is going up the hill, this very low hill, just 150 meters higher than the lake level, but it dries our wines, and it's important for us that because we have no problems with any disease or with botrytis. We have in Schloss Halbturn, we have a long history. Next year we have our roots are dated back 800 years, 1214 it was founded. But here on the high level winemaking, we have just a young history. The young history started with the high level winemaking. It started in 2001. We restructured the whole winery, and all the vineyards were restructured in 2001 after an analysis of the soil, and then we decided to replant 85% of our vineyards. We have two vineyards. One is called Wittmannshof. It is 42 hectares big. It's very interesting plot, south-faced, and there we have our biggest part of Pinot Noir. The soil is mainly limestone and red crushed rock. And the second vineyard, what we have, is located at Neusiedlersee on this lake. It is 8 hectares big. And there we also have lime bed inside with slate and quartz. It's interesting for us, these locations, because these two locations are part of the best terroirs of Austria, especially Jungenberg, this one vineyard at the Neusiedlersee. After 2001, we started the restructuring and the replanting, and mainly we are well known for the Pinot Noirs and also Austrian typical varieties of St. Laurent and Zweigelt and Blaufränkisch. Therefore, we have the main focus of the Austrian varieties and also the Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir, we have totally 12 hectares. For one winery, it's a big size in Austria. I think it's the biggest one. And we are focusing on that we want to harvest less as possible to get an elegant, fruity structure in the wine. It is not a question to look for a big volume of wine, it is the question of the high quality. Therefore, we have a very big handwork the whole year in the winery, and it starts with in the spring or before in that time to cut the vines, and also the whole work in the period of the vegetation. For example, we have 3 plots totally in our vineyards and different density. In our own in Wittmannshof, we have we kept 15% of the vineyard with the old vines. Now they are nearly 28 years old, but the clones are very old because they are selected from an old vineyard in Burgenland, about 60 years old. And the other area we restructured and replanted were new clones with 776 and 777, with the new clones with the new type of the Pinot Noir. Therefore, we have a mixture of an old structure and a new structure. And we are taking out for Schloss Halbturn just the best barrels of all of that. We are harvesting by hand in small boxes, 12 up to 15 kilos. We are putting these boxes in the vineyard in a cooling truck, because the vineyard is 4 kilometers far away, and the second plot is about 30 kilometers far away from the winery. And in the harvest time, mid of September up to mid of October, it happens that 25 degrees up to 30 degrees can happen. Therefore, we want to avoid that the fermentation starts before we say, now you are allowed to ferment. It's very important for us that we want to reduce it. We want to reduce, on the one hand, the quantity. On the other hand, we have a certificate, nearly like a certification of the quality for the whole work in the vineyard and also in the winery. When we bring the grapes into the winery, we put it in a cooling box and take it out portion by portion, because we want to sort we want to check the bunches and sort the berries in a very short period. We have 2 sorting tables. In the first sorting table, we cut the bunches and looking if anything is bad inside. After them, we destem it, and then later on we make a very hard handwork to select the berries on a high level, because we want to have just ripe berries with a good quality to give it in our fermenter. And the fermenter, and at that time about 20 people are working on these 2 sorting tables, because it is a very important thing that from the whole vegetation in the vineyard, this harvesting, and then the selection. It should be a closed circle of quality understanding, because this very short period from the harvest up to the time if it is put in the fermenter, it's very short, but you can make big mistakes if the fermentation is starting too early. We put it here after the selection. We put the berries inside the open wooden fermenter and make a cold maceration process for 5 up to 8 days with 4 degrees Celsius. And later on we start the fermentation just with the natural yeast. We don't use any industrial yeast, just with an increase of the temperature up to 28 to 30 degrees. It takes about 8 days. Later on the fermentation stops and the temperature is going down. For 2 or 3 days it is kept in the fermentation. We rack out nearly 90% without the young wine. In a free run, we rack it out to the barrels. 90% of our wines haven't seen any time any press, because we take it out from the open fermenter and put it in the barrels. And just about 10% is given to the press and gently pressed. And this press wine is separated, is vinificated separately, also in barrels. Mainly, our Pinot Noirs are vinificated in French oak barrels, 228 liters, and we use 25 up to 30% new oak, and the rest we use a second time. Our focus is not to bring as much as possible wood in our wine. Our focus is it's our result of our analysis for the last 10 years, that it is the ideal surrounding with the 228 barrels, the wooden barrels from France. And we want to keep that style from year to year. We don't want to change it. Therefore, we are focusing on that we use just this French oak, and at the end we take out this, after 11 or 12 months, we take out the wine, we give it in a big tank and keep it for 6 months there. In the period of the ripening in the barrels, we rack out 1 or 2 times the young wine and take out the sediment, clean with steam and with hot water, and give back the wine. It's very naturally. It's a big handwork without technic equipment. At the end, after the wine is given in the big tank, after the 11 or 12 months, we keep it 6 months in the tank, and then we make the bottling. And after the bottling, we put for another 30 months all the bottles here in the cellar for a ripening process, because we are focusing on that we bring it very late on the market. At the moment, we start selling our wines after 4 years after the harvest. And we offer for our customers up to 5 vintages, because we want to widen this portfolio on rare wines, and we want to bring it very late, that the gastronomy and the private customers are able to buy drinkable wines. That's the big problem, that most of the time the gastronomy and private customers are not able to buy wines here which are ripe. Our focus is here on elegant, fruity structure, typical wines. That's our focus. I think the wine speaks itself. Here we want to keep the structure as said, and we don't want to make experiments. We are very traditional since a long time, and that we want to keep for the next future.
Thank you so much, Dieter. That was so much information. My head is spinning. It was wonderful. I think we can see... Sorry?
Do you know the name of the pickers by any chance?
I think you can see that Pinot Noir producers from all around the world are incredibly passionate people. They're perfectionists. They aspire to producing this incredible grape variety in the best way that they possibly can. And I think that these 5 wines in front of us show us how diverse but how wonderful Pinot Noir really can be. I think we're very lucky in this world of wine that we get to drink wines from all over the world, and I as an Australian, I feel blessed that I get to taste some great Burgundies in the world. But I also feel blessed when I come to a tasting like this and get to taste these 5 wines from regions I've tasted a couple of Croatian Pinot Noirs before, thank you to Dennis, but that is just beautiful. Chile, I know a bit. That's a beautiful example of Chilean Pinot Noir. I think that's really exciting. New Zealand, yeah, they're our neighbours. We know them pretty well, but that's beautiful, Gunther. A lovely Central Otago Pinot Noir, very elegant. I think some of them get a bit chunky, but that one isn't. I'm Moorooduc Estate, that's mine. But that Austrian Pinot Noir, I just think, is a beautiful expression of this man's passion and his vineyard, and look at the wines in the glass and how they reflect the people who are making the wines and the places that they're making them. So Pinot Noir can be frustrating and at times disappointing, but I'm neither frustrated nor disappointed by these Pinot Noirs from different parts of the world. I think they're really exciting, and I'd be really happy for anyone to open a bottle of any of these wines for me to drink with a lovely piece of roast duck, or perhaps some Peking duck pancakes, or some dumplings, or just about anything else, a lovely piece of cheese. So has anyone got any questions of the panel before we finish up? We're running very quickly out of time. And as you can see, Pinot producers can talk. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to ask? We've got a question just down here.
Thank you. I just wondered, given that Pinot seems to be so sensitive to its site, how concerned are Pinot producers to the threat of climate warming?
Good question to ask the Australian on the eve of our new government disbanding all the climate research institutes in Australia. I think we're very, very, very sensitive to climate change and very concerned about climate change. Certainly, in our part of the world, vintage has moved from the end of March to the end of February. It doesn't mean that we're ripening Pinot any more quickly, but the vines are waking up earlier, and they're starting to shoot and bud and produce leaves and then fruit earlier in the year. Now, this isn't a problem as such, because, as I say, they're still ripening over the same period of time, but in early February and mid-February in Australia, it's still pretty hot. So keeping the fruit cool is a real issue, and we've had to invest in a second-hand reefer so that we can stick our fruit in there and cool it down before we start processing it. That's how we're dealing with things at the moment. I think that in the vineyard, we're hoping it's not going to get too hot to grow Pinot Noir, but it's one of the reasons that I think the Mornington Peninsula is special, because the Yarra Valley is getting too hot in a lot of parts for Pinot Noir, as is other parts of Victoria. Adelaide Hills is always too hot for Pinot Noir, in my opinion, apart from a couple of very special sites. Tasmania will be all right. Other winemakers, what are your thoughts about global warming in your vineyards where you are?
Actually, we have less problems in Central Otago with temperature, but what we have definitely is that we are getting the same rainfall, but in 2 days rather than spread over a month. So we are fighting more about these extremes, which on the scales are looking the same. We have the same monthly rainfall, but now it's no longer in 30 days spread, it's spread in a couple of days. So this is more, it's the temperature in Central Otago probably isn't the issue at the moment. Yeah, but it's the other things which can create some issues.
In part of Croatia where it comes from, actually, it's quite a benefit of global warming, because they always had a bit of a problem, because mainly white varieties, they always had a bit of a problem with botrytis. But this time it's much dry, they find it much drier, especially the last 10-15 years, and there's less and less botrytis in the vineyard. So actually, they do benefit from, especially red varieties and especially Pinot, they do benefit from global warming.
In the case of Chile, Well, really, so far we are not experienced like big changes because of the global warming. Climate is still quite consistent year after year. We're not seeing big changes, which is, for us, is at the moment, we're not, like, it is a concern, but it's not a main concern because we're not seeing that much difference. Well, we're a very long country, so we will just move south every year.
In Austria, if the wine writers are writing it is a very bad year and everywhere you have no recommendation of any vintage, we have the best years for Pinot Noir because of the big rainfalls or maybe the cold temperature. But even it might not be that it is. But here the wine writers in Austria, it is generally said very bad vintage. But here in Austria we have so many microclimates, and that's the big thing. You have to analyze here where you are and what is the focus of that region and what is about the quality of the producer and the philosophy.
Excellent. Any other questions? Has anyone on the panel got anything they'd like to say in conclusion? I think the wines are speaking for themselves. Thank you so much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a delight to present these wines to you today.